Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining this webinar on why you must update your social media strategy. So we have all the way from New York City, we have Yael Bar Tur. Yael, how are you today, this morning?
Hi, pretty good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. And as you all know, we'll also kind of give it a minute or so for more people to join us. But I guess if you've joined us, you're probably dealing in the marketing or business development place. Second. Okay, I'm just getting people in as we talk. So you're probably into the marketing and business development, or you own a business. As far as I know, we have an interesting selection of attendees. We have people from nonprofit, from government, from other police stations, from startups to Australia, to all kind of places. So thanks again for joining us. I see people keep on coming. Yael, are you ready to share more about what you do and what you can share with us?
Yeah, let's do it.
Great. So as you join in, let me tell you a bit about Yael so you know why I've invited her and what she can actually give us. So Yael Bar Tur, today, she's a digital media consultant and the former NYPD Director of Social Media and Digital Strategy. She was in NYPD for 6 years, and she actually transformed the way NYPD police officers view the media and use it to convey their messages, and she's going to tell us all about it. She's also a Harvard Kennedy School of Government graduate with a Master of Public Policy, and she has over 15 years of communications experience. And we actually met 20 years ago at the Israeli Defense Force spokesperson unit. So apparently we go a long way, right, Yaeli?
True, yeah.
And a few more points that are important to kind of grasp what Yael has been doing in the past few years. And as we talk, we just have another amazing IDF spokesperson joining us, Dvora. So Yael, in the past few years, let's talk a bit about numbers. So she managed more than 200 new social media accounts, more than 1 million followers, 60 million viral videos views, more than 1,000 people that she trained of how to manage social media, 2.2 million engagements, and over 100 positive news stories. This is amazing. So let's hear from you. So we actually gathered here to talk about the current situation in the USA, COVID-19, police riots, everything that is happening. So tell us the overview. So what is actually happening now with the public in the USA?
So, it's a crazy time for everyone. Similar to Israel and similar to the whole world, we're struggling with COVID-19 here. Ups and downs, but basically New York City, where I am, where it was for a short while kind of the hub of COVID-19, we've been on lockdown since March 13th, I think. Lockdown being, that basically businesses aren't open. So a lot of people are indoors, not really meeting with each other. Over the last few weeks, people have started going out again. They've started opening restaurants. You can't sit inside, but it started to ease up a little bit. But what you had for 3 months, basically, is people, for the most part, in some kind of isolation indoors, and they spend a lot of that time online. And to add to that, I'm sure everybody heard about the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police officers. And that also caused a huge rise in protests and this kind of demands for change from police departments around the country in a way that really hasn't been seen in many, many years. And it really made a huge impact on the country as a whole, on the national mood, and all of it really started online. So those are, I think, the two major things that the country is dealing with right now, and they're two kind of unprecedented things that are just dominating the public conversation and really affecting everyone's life. I think there are very few people who haven't been affected by either of those two things.
So, it's interesting when we kind of talked before this, when we were preparing for the questions and so on, it's a bit reminded me of what we used to do in the Army. And the spokesperson, our job was to actually make sure that the Army will appeal more positive in the media, but also that the soldiers will know how to convey themselves to the media and use it as a friend. And it seems to me, if I take it 20 years later, and from your perspective, your job was actually to make sure that the image of the police officers will be better, to humanize them. Do you think that the whole George Floyd and recent events actually took the positive image you built so hard down the drain, if you don't mind me saying?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely made a negative effect on how people view police officers. When you think about it, a lot of people don't have interactions with police officers. So even in Israel or wherever you are in the world, for the most part, you don't interact with officers on a day-to-day basis. So you get your information and kind of how you want to feel about police department from the news, from social media, and when you see an influx of negative images. It definitely will change the way you view it. My role was to also show, the day-to-day side, the positive sides, the work of the police officers that maybe is kind of less sensational, but is more true to, the 99% of interactions that are positive and good. And in addition to that, also to actually connect with the community and interact with the community. So I think it's definitely, the public opinion right now is definitely not favorable for police, but I think it's something that happens. It kind of ebbs and flows. And I'm hoping that police departments now will, if something positive will come out of it, it's them understanding that they need to focus more on community engagement, on communications, and on kind of working together with their community to work to rebuild these relationships.
Yeah, so what you're saying, if I'm kind of recapping that, and again, we had more people joining us, so hi and welcome. So, and before I'll recap, I definitely invite you all to write your questions or any comment in the chat box. We will address your questions at the end around the end of the interview, around the end of the hour. So what you're saying basically that the normal citizen would not usually have any communication with police officers. And now, since their presence is so big, if it's because of COVID or because of riots or because of demonstrations and so on, then people show their voices much more, which eventually reflects obviously on social media. And then my question for you would be, so what are the most common topics these days in social media as a result of this whole situation that we see it also in Israel, same as in the US?
Yeah. So the common topics right now, it can really change from day to day, but you're seeing a lot of, or from minute to minute, really, you're seeing a lot more negativity on social media. And the reason being that, if you're familiar with some of how these channels work, they tend to elevate things that are a little more sensational and that are going to get a reaction from people. And a lot of times these things are things that cause negativity and, are kind of around anger. So I don't know if in Israel people are familiar with the term Karen, but this has become, maybe the word of the year for 2020 here in the US. But Karen is what they call somebody who wants to put somebody in their place. It's a negative term, somebody who complains, somebody who says, I guess the biggest way to describe it is they say, somebody who says, I want to speak to your manager. So it's kind of this image of this angry person who wants to call people out. And,
so it's very Israeli. We all want to speak with the manager.
Yeah, maybe that's why it's not very big in Israel, because it doesn't really stand out that much. But the biggest case of Karen here was, and I know some people in Israel have heard of it because I've heard it being discussed there, even in the news, is the case of Amy Cooper, who is a white woman who called the police on a black man in Central Park who asked her to put a leash on her dog, and she called the police and said, this man is attacking me. So the reason I bring this story up is because it's become very common now on social media to capture people doing something that, most people might think is morally wrong or they think is excessive, and to elevate those stories and kind of pile up on them. So you have a community that is tense to begin with, dealing with COVID, dealing with George Floyd, and now it's also kind of taking people who are doing things that we disagree with, or maybe, maybe you agree with them, but things that we see as negative, and then kind of throwing them into that fire and piling up on them. So you get a very kind of negative world right now, where a lot of the attacks are personal, unfortunately. And what happens with that is it elevates a lot of the negativity, a lot of the anger. It kind of brings down a lot of the, I guess, normal day-to-day conversation of people trying to share their ideas in a, respectful and intellectual way. And also, we don't really have proof of that, but I'm willing to bet that it causes a lot of people to retract. So a lot of people are like, you know what, I'm not going to be on social media for a while, or maybe I'm going to be, but I'm definitely not going to comment. I'm not going to write what I have to say. I'm not going to say my opinion because I'm going to be attacked. And that leaves more room for the, for the people who are kind of the smaller minority that have the loud voices.
Yeah, and I mean, that's interesting what you're saying, because if I'm an individual, then I can decide if I want to comment or not. But if I'm a company, then I may have more responsibility, and we're going to go over it in a few minutes. And that being said, again, I would like to invite you, if you have any comments about what you see on social media, of your view of the situation in Israel or in the US, please feel free to comment out in the chat box. So,
and also, sorry, just to add to that, as an individual as well, you also bear some responsibility right now, even if you don't want to bear it. But if I work for a company, and I, not even a large company, but let's say I work for a company and I'm caught on camera doing something offensive, or I comment on something and I say something that, people don't like the way it sounds, it has happened in the past, and it's still happening, that people will find my employer through, it's not very hard to find it, and start calling for me to be fired or reprimanded or something. So we see a lot of that, and I wrote about that. I wrote a blog post about that, and if you go to my website, you can find it, saying, we're all representatives of our employers now, whether we like it or not, and all of our employees are representative of us. Even if, some people have on their social media profile, they say, oh, my views don't reflect my company. It doesn't matter, unfortunately, because if I'm caught tomorrow doing something embarrassing or something, offensive on camera, my employer has a PR problem now, even though they had nothing to do with it.
Yes, and we also have a question about it from Ganit, but we'll address that later on, in more depth. So yeah, that's a very interesting and even problematic situation that we're facing these days. But we talked about the negative, and I guess we all feel it these days, unfortunately, with so many, bombarded with so many issues, the health, the riots, the government, and so on. But is there anything positive that you can see this time on social media?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm hoping now we'll start talking after I put forward all the doom and gloom. Yeah, I think there's absolutely a lot of positive right now. First of all, you do have, when you look at your social media posts, maybe you get 2 or 3 comments or shares or some kind of engagement. But if you look at your views, you usually have views, times 10 that, or maybe even more. So it's just important to remember that there are a lot of people out there that are just listening and taking in information, and not necessarily interacting, and not necessarily saying, I have a strong opinion about this, but they might actually, be reading this and learning and thinking about what you have to say and taking that with them. So the positive thing is to remember that social media is not, and I don't know, if a lot of social media strategists would admit this out loud, but I have a kind of a bit of a sober view about it. But social media is not a reflection of society. It is not the kind of global democracy that it was envisioned to be. Like I said, it elevates some of the very, very loud voices. So it's important to say that it's not a reflection of the world. And I forget who said it, but someone said, if you just turn off your computer and talk to people around you, you'll realize that people are a lot nicer than you think they are. That's one thing. And the second thing that I think is very interesting from my perspective of working with public sector is that it's caused a lot of public sector and organizations that maybe were a little behind with tech to realize that they have to really take this seriously now. and they have to really catch up because everything's online. They have to get their, you know, not just like the relative technology and the software, but also they need to become more comfortable with, you know, doing online outreach and being transparent and using, you know, using all these wonderful online tools that we have to connect with people.
Exactly, and as you're saying, it's true that social media doesn't necessarily represent the world. I liked what you said, that it definitely represents the people that are around us and the circles that are related to us in some way. But it's a very important thing to not to forget that it represents a certain voices, and as you said, the loud voices, but not everyone. That being said, I want to go back again to a bit in more depth to the brand and people personally. So, and you just touched on it as well, but so if I'm a brand, what should I be aware of? So on the one hand, you're saying, and even a person, like an individual, so be more techy. What else, how else it is affecting them?
So if you're a brand, what you really want to know is that social media is a bit of a minefield right now. And even if you have the best of intentions, you want to be very, very careful about what you put up there. So you do want to double check everything. At NYPD, we had a rule that no matter what goes out, you know, you had to have another pair of eyes go over it, even if it's the most, and sometimes brands get in trouble, not for taking a strong stand, but for writing something, you know, that is completely kind of everyday normal, hey, we're having a sale, whatever, but is considered tone deaf or considered inappropriate. So you want to be very aware of what's going on social media that day and that moment and what people are talking about to make sure that you're not being tone deaf. You want to always have another set of eyes, someone else go over it, not just for typos, but also, hey, does this sound right? Do you think people might, you know, misinterpret this or something like that? And the other thing you want to be aware of is that people on social media now, they have a very strong bullshit filter, right? For lack of it, sorry for the phrase, but there's no really better way to say it. So if you are just using this momentum to make a statement and say something like Black Lives Matter on your social media account, you're going to be held to that. So you can't just say something just to say it, and then, you know, and then say, okay, well, I've done my part. So people really want you to kind of stand behind your words. So if you are being, you know, supportive of a movement or, you know, trying to take a stand on a certain issue, you're going to kind of be asked to put your money where your mouth is. And if you say something like, you know, we're very supportive of the Black Lives Matter movement, but you don't have any African American or Black employees, then you're going to be held to that. So you want to make sure that you're not just trying to you know, blow smoke, as they say, but you can actually stand behind what you say.
Yes.
So, and sorry, somebody asked about the word tone deaf. A tone deaf, I guess, would be if you're saying something that, you know, just appears like wrong in the context. So if everybody is talking about the murder of George Floyd right now, let's say if it happened this morning, tone deaf would be to say, hey, everybody, you know, our products are half off today. Because it just shows that you're not, you know, you're not in touch, you're not in tune with what's happening around you, with what people are talking about.
You said three main things. You said keep relevancy, so be post things that are relevant to what's happening right now. Make sure that another set of eyes give you another person gives you his comment about what you're about to post, and make sure you stand behind your word and not just bullshit, sorry, stuff to the air, which eventually you will not be able to stand behind. So if we're taking it another layer, so how can we actually create a strategy in uncertain days like this? And what would you recommend a marketer? What questions should a marketer ask himself while he is working around adapting or adjusting the current strategy of the digital media?
Yeah. So it's important that when you look at your communication strategy, it has to be part of your overall strategy. So it's usually not a good idea if you have a communications or a social media person that's not really in touch with like the higher ranks of the organization. Because when you're building a communication strategy, you always want to start with what your strategy is as an organization. So let's take a police department, for example. You know, when I work with clients, I ask them, what is your goal? And obviously, you know, people say, I want to keep the public safe. Sometimes people say, my goal is to have more followers, or my goal is to have more likes. That's not a goal. That's more of an outcome. But the goal could be, I want to hire more people. I want to make sure we have less victims of certain crimes that are in a rise. So every organization, every company, whether it's, you know, a startup or a police department, they have a goal. So when you build your strategy, you want to make sure that your communication strategy supports that goal, and you want to build certain messaging around that. So again, let's take the recruitment example, right? Let's say I'm a police department and I'm having a recruitment problem and I want to recruit more people. So my communication strategy will be centered around that. And from that, I will build my messaging. So my messaging might be, hey, I want to show, you know, how great it is to be a police officer here, how much the police officers enjoy the work. I want to show how diverse our police department is, because I want to attract people from all different walks of life and I want them to feel comfortable. I want to show that, you know, the good and positive and fulfilling stuff the police officers do. So you take your main strategy, you build your messaging out of that, and then whenever you post on social media, you want to have those things in front of you. Actually, you know, I would even recommend having them on a whiteboard or somewhere in front of you where you say, hey, I'm going to post about this thing. Does it hit one of these messaging, one of these key messages? And it's very important also to mention that these are dynamic, so they can change all the time, and they should change based on what's going on and the needs of your organization.
I heard a while ago in a certain course I was that someone says that when you post different posts, I mean, when you also do your strategy, think of it like, you know, like the window, like the shop window. Like every time, if the shop has a few different windows, so it will give you a different presentation in each window. So always kind of try to bring different angles of your company or messaging or values through your posts, if you agree as well.
That's a good way to think about it, because it's an insight into what you have inside.
Yeah. And I want to go back to Hila here mentioned that we talked earlier about how you, what you post and if it's relevant and it's right with other people's views. And she said it's what happened to Gal Gadot, and you and I actually talked about it in a preliminary talk about the fact that Gal Gadot, she made this great song with a lot of celebrities, and I'm just recapping for those of you who don't really know. So she was really coming from her heart. They kind of redid a certain, I think it was an Imagine song by the Beatles. And it really got negative response from so many people, even though she meant well. So, oh, we lost you.
I lost my video there for a second. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Don't go, we need you.
Hi, Ga. So like Leon said, Gal Gadot came with the best of intentions, which a lot of times is what happens on social media when people get destroyed, is they come with really good intentions. But it was just very poor timing. And, you know, if you think of social media as like a group of people, a small group of people that are already annoyed, they're scared. This was right in the beginning of COVID. By the way, I think if she would have posted it now, or, you know, it wouldn't have gotten that kind of negative response, but it was a perfect storm where everyone was just so upset and so overwhelmed by what's going on, and just trying to make ends meet and losing their jobs. And, you know, and the last thing they needed is a few celebrities telling them that it's going to be okay. So, you know, I think that's just a good example of something that, you know, might have the best of intentions, but based on the timing and based on the mood and based on the tone of what's going on social media, it didn't land.
Yeah. And with that in mind, I want to talk more about, so I know many of our guests here are actually startups or companies or people that work in the US, but there are resides outside of the US. I know we have a few NGOs here and again, startup founders and so on. So how would you recommend, what would you recommend for companies or startups that are headquartered outside of the US and cater the US market? What would be your suggestions for them in terms of the digital media strategy?
So if you cater to the U.S. market, that's your key audience. That's your core audience. So you do want to be in touch with what's going on there. If people expect you to take a stand on something, and the best way to know that is just to see what's going on around your page, around your following. So let's say if you're a company that I think caters primarily and only to American audience, there's probably a good likelihood that you're going to see people around your on your comments, on your feed, expecting you to engage and to kind of take a stand. In which case, you might want to consider doing that. That said, I've seen a lot of global companies who haven't taken a stand, and I imagine that it's very strategic too, because they say, you know what, only 10% of my business comes from the U.S. and the rest of it comes from Middle East, Africa, Asia, Europe, where people might just be confused by this, or just might not have a strong opinion on it. So strategically, it doesn't make sense. I'm sorry if it sounds a little bit cynical. But you do want to, if you do decide like, hey, I want to take a stand on this, you really need to consider, who your audience is and who your people are. And then of course, like I said earlier, you can't just expect to say, a Black Lives Matter and then keep going about your day without putting your money where your mouth is if you're a larger company for the most part.
You had an example about a specific gaming company?
Yeah, I have. There's a gaming company that has I forget the name, an Israeli gaming company that has a very, very wide following, does mobile games, they didn't mention anything about what's going on, but when I look at their feed, first of all, it would have been kind of off-brand for them because they never mentioned anything about any current events. They're specifically focused on games and focused on people following them in order to get more, virtual coins. And then when you look at their audience, it is also American, but it is very, very global. So, and for the most part, if you look at other continents, there definitely have been some effects of the police protests here in other countries, but I don't think it has really swept any nation as it has U.S. because it's a very American centric issue.
Okay, so we also, again, I want to thank you. I see the questions that are coming up and we'll address them around the last quarter of the hour. But I do want to ask you, when you are here, a guest here, when you see different companies that don't comment or do comment, I mean, what do you feel? How do you feel around the brands that you're following when you see them either commenting or not commenting on the current situation? So feel free to share that in the chat. And yeah, let's take it another step forward. So eventually, if we're talking about brands, companies, they want the dollar at the end of the day, especially these days where we have some, the financial crisis has hit some companies, some industries. So how can they influence their sales through their digital strategy these days? Or what type of statements should they not consider or do consider?
So I definitely wouldn't try to elevate any of the negativity that's going on into trying to get sales, because it's usually people have tried it. For some reason, every year around 9/11, some company tries to make an ad that has something to do with 9/11, and every year it's like not a good idea. So people are cynical on social media. Remember that. Again, don't necessarily reflect the whole world, but they're cynical and they're very quick to pile on. So if you are going to do, let's say, if you have a company that has something that could be very, very helpful for, the situation that we're in right now, you want to tread lightly around that, and you just want to make sure that your strategy, what you're putting out, isn't considered or it doesn't appear like you're taking advantage of the situation. And that's a very fine line to walk, because there's no real playbook that says, hey, how do I make sure I don't come off cynical? How do I make sure I don't come off like I'm trying to profit off this? And in my experience, the best way to do it is, if you have a few ideas, is to have a very diverse team around you, and diverse being, people with different opinions, maybe people of different backgrounds, and be able to run it through them. I'm sorry?
Great tip. I mean, have different opinions and different diversity around you.
Yeah. And be able to ask yourself also, if you're going to take a bit of a risk, which I totally recommend doing a lot. I think people should take risks on social media. Otherwise, it's just going to be super boring, and nobody would follow them. But if you are going to take a risk, which we would do a lot at NYPD, we would always ask ourselves, what's the worst that could happen, right? And there's always an answer to that. Okay, the worst that could happen is people might unfollow me, or people might, make fun of me. And ask yourself if you can handle that. If you can, and it's worth the risk, then do it. If the worst that could happen is, I could get fired, or I don't know, people might protest, then, maybe you don't want to do it. But you do have to think of it very strategically, and it kind of, I'm disappointed sometimes to see organizations or, people in the public sector who just put stuff on social media that you see that they clearly haven't thought through. People make mistakes, and that's fine. But, you never want to just, like, if you're presenting a large brand, you really can't afford to just tweet on the fly, or, have a thought pop in your head and post it. If you're a celebrity, or if you're the president of the United States, you do that, right? But for big brands, for big companies, for definitely for police departments, unfortunately, you have to be just a little bit more strategic.
So let's talk about values, about brand values. If you're a public sector police, or again, if you're a startup in the gaming or any other fun sector. So how do I make sure, with all the current events, and again, with my intention to connect to my audience, to still be loyal to my brand values?
Again, I think it all comes down to strategy, and to having kind of a clearly defined message. And your loyalty to your brand values is an important part of that too. Because once you start, dipping your toes into commenting on a certain issue, you're going to be expected to continue to comment or continue to address these certain issues. So it's all about measuring all these things together when you're building your strategy.
And when we talked earlier, you mentioned there's so many mistakes people or marketers or companies are doing when it comes to posting, because we need to realize that some people get the information through their mobile and some through their computer. So what's some kind of tips that you can provide for mobile social posting?
Yeah, so it's very, very important to, when you're posting, to always think mobile. So the vast majority of people, I think over 90% of people who are going to be interacting with your posts are doing it on this tiny screen, right? It's very small, and they're very rarely going to your page to see what you have to say. Like, they're not waking up in the morning and saying, oh, let me check out Apple's Instagram today to say what they have to say. No, they're scrolling, right? So they're doing this, and they're looking through whatever they're following, and celebrities and their friends, and it's very difficult to break out, especially if you're using Facebook or Instagram, which are sort of devaluing brands right now and trying to elevate friends and people So you're competing with a lot, and you have this much space. So what's very, very important is anything you post, you want to make sure, and this is difficult, you want to make sure that it can be consumed, or at the very least will make you stop on a space about this big. So if that's in the photos that you post, the words that you use, the things that you're asking people to do, right? If you're asking someone to click on a link, not to say that you shouldn't, because a lot of times you want people to click on a link, but you have to take into account that the vast majority, I would say 95% of people, if you're lucky, are not going to click on that link. So you have to make sure that you're either creating some kind of teaser, some kind of incentive for them to click on it, or that you're putting it in a way that whether it's the image that you're using or the words that you're using, that will at least cause them to understand what you're trying to say. So, for example, let's say if we have one of my pet peeves is when organizations say post and they say, please look at our press release here, and all I'm getting from that, because I'm not clicking on the link, is look at our press release. But if they would have written, please see our press release, welcoming the new police commissioner and the name and whatever, and then if you want more information, you can click on the link, then you're ensuring that everybody that's interacting with that's not clicking on the link, that they get the idea. So you want to make sure that you can cram as much of that idea or what you're trying to convey into that post, because for the most part, you're going to get very little space in people's mind.
That's a very important tip in my view. So you're saying really making sure that whatever call to action you're having, I can understand what's behind it, even if I won't click on it. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And now I want to go back to what we briefly talked about, actually companies versus their employees. So, essentially, as you mentioned, the employees are representing the company, representing their brand. And you said earlier, you gave an example that if someone is misbehaving in any way, another stranger can either can probably understand where he works and complain to his management or so on, because this person is in some way representing the company. So the question is, how can social media managers or marketing managers activate their management and employees to influence with the right messaging these days?
So that's a great question. So the more people you have, the more I would recommend having a personal social media policy for your employees. And it's tricky because, you can't really tell people, at least in the US, you can't tell people that they can't be on social media. And, you can't restrict, you can't tell them don't be political, because, it's a freedom of speech issue. But it's important to set some kind of policy of standards of, what you can and cannot do. You can't open up a social media account for your branch or for your, anything that looks like it represents a company. Like if you're Starbucks, you would tell your employees, hey, you can't open up an account for your Starbucks on 77th Street or something like that. And you want to create these kind of rules of conduct. And then also, I would add to that, if the company can afford it, to do some education. So even work with a consultant or work with someone in digital media to give their employees more on an enrichment scale, but also it will positively affect your brand. Talk to them a little bit about the dangers of social media and what they should and should not do to protect themselves. And I think that would be a positive for the employees themselves, because they'll learn more about, their public image, and also, will really decrease the risk for the brand or for the organization that somebody might do something that will reflect negatively on them.
I really like what you said about actually educate them, so they will get value. They realize that the company is actually investing in them, but also they'll get more understanding of why they should or consider behave in a certain way. I'm going to go back. Yeah, sorry.
I'm good.
I'm going to go back to what Ganit asked earlier, and she said, about the fact that we mentioned that employees need to be aware of what they're saying. So she said, don't you feel it's a dangerous path to be afraid to speak up, or just because it might be captured on social media?
Yeah, it is. For society, I think it is. And there's a lot of discussion about that offline right now, which I think is fascinating, about what is our tolerance for different views in this country. And in that sense, I think, and I don't know, I've been living outside of Israel for a long time, but I think Israel has an advantage because it's very small and people know, you know, whether you like it or not, you're going to interact with people who have very different political views than you do. And you might even have friends or members of your family that you completely disagree with, but you still, you know, like them and respect them. And I think in the US, or especially with the rise of social media, we're very much more kind of becoming you know, more insulated, and people have less interaction on a day-to-day basis with people who have different opinions than them politically. And that causes you know, people to kind of really only be with people around them that kind of strengthen their viewpoints, and they have a hard time tolerating different viewpoints. So I think in that sense, it is unfortunate. And social media, you know, as much as it's my bread and butter and I love it, has been a contributing factor to that. But I'm very happy and very optimistic to see a lot of the voices coming out now of people saying, you know, we can't afford to cancel each other, as they say, if we disagree or if we have different opinions. There's, you know, being overtly racist is one thing, but let's say if you'd like a different presidential candidate than me, or if you have different views about policing than me, we should be able to have a conversation and maybe disagree, but still respect each other. So it's going down a bit of I think a disappointing path, but I am encouraged to see a lot of voices, a lot of journalists, a lot of people coming out saying, okay, you know, we need to be better than this.
Well, I like it. Like it's a very it's a message of hope. You're saying that out of all this mess on all fronts, some and hopefully more and more people will actually understand that by being open to one another, by accepting them, even though they have different opinions or the way they view life, we should still stick together. I want to kind of recap some of the main points that I have wrote down from our conversation so far. So first of all, you said when you post as a company, as an individual, as a founder, make sure that you understand what the current events are and give you a message that you could actually stand behind. Incentivize your audience through to click on links through a call to action that actually describes what they will see on the other side. Think mobile when you're posting, take risks. And the last thing you mentioned earlier is about educating your employees about social media, and how to make sure that way you can decrease some risks of your employees writing stuff that may harm your company. We will address the rest of the questions first, but you know, you worked so many years for the NYPD, and I have actually been living in New York and coming there in and out through this time, and I've heard so many amazing stories that you've shared along the years, how you really made a difference over there. I know your colleagues are laughing at you and saying that because the NYPD was so behind, you brought them up to the 90s, like as a great advantage that you brought in. And I know you worked hard to really make some difference within the organization. So I asked you to share one story, and this story is thankfully backed by an interesting picture and article on Times. So please tell us, what was the turning point? What happened here, and what was the turning point in this event for you as director of social media?
Okay, so this is yeah, this looks like a very serious person, and you know, I'm standing there in the middle of this scene, and there's like, you know, I think that this was downtown Manhattan at like 7 a.m. Where a couple years ago they were sending somebody was sending mail bombs to people, and this was Robert De Niro, and it looks like we're very, very busy here, but I think we were just trying to figure out where we want to go for coffee because it was done by then. But what I think about this picture, aside from the fact that I think it's funny because it, is the fact that we were talking, and then the head of the unit there that is runs that whole area said, we were just talking, and he's like, okay, I gotta go. I need to tweet this thing out. And that just made me so happy because he realized that he is in the middle of a public relations issue, right? So the threat had been mitigated, the pipe bomb, whatever, had been like taken by the NYPD bomb squad, but you realize that the whole world is talking about it, and they're all waiting for you to say something. And for me, for this commander, for this higher ranking commander to realize like, okay, I gotta go and put the message out. That's my secondary thing after making sure there's no threat, was just very fulfilling to understand that, to realize that people understand now that they need to be, forthcoming and put the messaging out.
Great. I love this story. One out of many. So Yael, we'll go to some of the questions. Let's just go a bit back and that were asked all along. We have Ivan saying, hi, Yael, great to share.
Hi, Ivan. Sorry, my colleague from the group, great city of New York government.
So, hi, Ivan. Good to have you with us. He's saying, social media has helped open old wounds in the police community relations that the NYPD has worked so hard to improve for years. What advice do you have for them? Should they wait for the onslaught of negativity to subside, or should they start any brand rebuilding effort in the midst of this turmoil?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think a lot of police departments, NYPD and a lot of others, it's your first instinct is to kind of shut down, right? Say, okay, there's too much going on. I'm not going to comment about this. And that might be a good idea for maybe a day or two. But it's usually not. And it's usually, I think, never too early to rebuild. You have to be very, very careful. So you can't, like I said earlier, you can't appear like you're cynical, and you can't appear like you don't have, you don't put your money where your mouth is. What I would have recommended, and what I've seen police departments do, is first of all, they come out and with as much transparency as they can. So colleagues in Colorado and in California, they put out immediately after the George Floyd incident, they put out information saying, okay, this is our transparency hub. It's a link to a website, and this is where, this is us showing you that we're going to put out all the information about shootings, about use of force, whatever it is that you think people are interested in. And I think that's a great first step. The NYPD is very good at collecting data, and I think one of the most open police departments that I know of with data. But it would be good to like kind of tout that and put that out there and say, hey, this is our information. We're being forthcoming. The other thing that I would recommend doing, and I know they're doing a lot of it, is showcasing the work that they're actually doing on the ground with people, showcasing the work that the conversations that they're having with people, showcasing and not just little things like nobody right now wants to see just a photo of a cop like helping an old lady cross the street or something like that. I mean, it's a nice image, but it doesn't, that would be tone deaf because it's just not right in this current strategy. But you want to show, the actual more like the other steps that you're doing that a little bit more, go a little bit deeper. So meetings that you're having, policies that you're advising. But you want to try to avoid being on the defense and be proactive about showing all the good, meaningful stuff that you're doing. But it has to be meaningful. It can't be Band-Aid solutions because it's not the time for that.
Thank you. And we have Lori here asking kind of a similar questions. She said, after George Floyd, Minneapolis Police went silent on Twitter for several days. Would love Yael's opinion on that.
Yeah, so I was very, I don't know, I guess disappointed by that. I even set up an alert on Twitter because I wanted to see I was curious to see when they would start tweeting. And what happened is, and what I always say is, if you're not out there talking, the whole world was talking about this, but even if it's a small incident, other people are kind of defining the story for you. And I would have loved to even see them saying, you know, we're investigating this. And I realize as a police department, you're never going to just be able, like I said, you can't just like say things on the fly. There are investigations, there are rules, there are procedures. You're always going to have a disadvantage on that edge. But you can always say, you know, we're investigating this, we're looking into it. And there was information coming out. There was stuff coming out of the mayor's office. But unfortunately, the police department wasn't really forthcoming. I don't know what happened there, but about a week later, it completely changed, and they've been very active since, which I think is great. But I think those first few critical days, it wouldn't have turned the situation, and in that place, you're just doing damage control, right? You're nothing the Minneapolis Police Department could post would be, you know, would turn the tides. But it would have been important for them to at least say, hey, you know, we're aware of this, we're taking ownership of this. I think they, even before they tweeted, if I'm not mistaken, they retweeted, they reshared information from the mayor's office, which also to me came off as insincere a little bit, right? Because it's like, think of it like an email. If you're expecting me to hear something from me about something that I did, and instead I forward you an email from my boss, again, it was just a bit of a missed opportunity for me. So yeah, I was hoping they would be able to say what they can say. I'm not saying they should have said within an hour, you know, this officer has been fired, because they didn't know that. They'd have to do an investigation. But you know, it would have been nice for them, I think, to at least tell the public, hey, you know, we're on this, we're aware.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to move to Chen, which asks more about the nonprofit industry. So in regards to elevating negativity for raising money, would you say the same goes for nonprofits? We have to highlight an issue in order to emphasize why the funds are needed? And I will also add, as far as I know, that in terms of nonprofits, a lot of people stop their monthly subscription for donations and all that. So obviously they also have experienced some heavy hits in some cases.
Yeah. So that's a complicated question. So I know there are, I said earlier that, you know, the US is very, very divided right now, and there are echo chambers, right? So there are people who are very, very anti-police, let's say people who are very, very pro-police. If you have a nonprofit that's raising money for police, you could, you know, only stay in that world and post and say things that are, you know, a little divisive. Let's say, you know, our officers are under attack, they need our help. But it would be appealing to your audience. It would probably be effective, even though, you know, it wouldn't be kind of speaking to everyone. So again, I think that the question really comes back to what your strategy is, and you can effectively raise money if your nonprofit is helping. You know, if you're helping people who are, you know, doing police work, or if you're helping people who are protesting, or if you're helping people who are dealing with the effects of COVID-19, I would definitely use social media for that, but I would focus my efforts in showing how my organization is helping, and less, you know, give us money now, because that will, you know, that will come out of people realizing that you know, you're helping. And I think it's actually, you know, I think it could be a good, very, very good time for a lot of nonprofits now, because people want to help, and people feel like very, you know, helpless in a lot of ways. So if you're offering some kind of solution, you have to do it carefully, and make sure that they realize that you and your nonprofit is actually benefiting the cause that they care about.
I totally agree with you. And I think also this time and age, there's a lot of nonprofits, or a lot of a money donation request, and you as a donor would like to make sure that the funds are going to a company that really, or a fund that really going to use it right for the right causes. So you're saying by echoing what you're doing, you're actually helping get more, raise more funds. Erez was saying actually a question that I also had. What about LinkedIn? So we talked a lot about Twitter, which is, I know, is more very common when it comes to media relations, Facebook, but what about LinkedIn, which is definitely a major tool when it comes in business?
So LinkedIn is really interesting. I think LinkedIn, I value LinkedIn for the personal connections. I think every brand should have a presence on there. But I think for me, I think it's more helpful on a professional networking level, and also as kind of a business card for your organization. So, and somebody asked also, and I think that's kind of related to that. If my own startup is a social media, if you have kind of a B2B company, then you should think of your social media as maybe a little bit as like a business card. Okay. So think of it as a place where, okay, maybe you're not going to get a ton of engagement, a ton of stuff on LinkedIn and Twitter. And if you have like a B2B business where you sell like, I don't know, office chairs, maybe your social media isn't going to be like all that exciting, but you have to maintain it because it's sort of like your, like you said earlier, like your window into your organization. So that's how I feel about LinkedIn. That's how I feel about, I kind of answered two questions in one there. How I feel about like, B2B businesses on social media is they need to maintain that presence as their business card, as their, their forward facing place where people learn about the organization, because a lot of time people are going to spend more time on there than they spend on your website.
Yeah, and I mean, what you said earlier about media, about your digital strategy, it also applies for LinkedIn. So whatever post you want to post on different channels, as you're saying, LinkedIn could also be one of those. Yeah.
And LinkedIn is a lot less, in my opinion, just a lot less negative because Twitter is the most anonymous in a way. You don't have to write your name or your photo or what you do. Facebook is less anonymous because you have your photo there sometimes, but you always have to use your real name. Facebook is very, very committed to that. And LinkedIn is the highest level where you write your name, where you work, what you do. So people are going to be a lot more civil there. And it's going to be a lot closer to just kind of professional networking and less town hall of, people kind of going at each other.
Great. So we have a few more minutes to go. We have a person, I don't know if Alma is the right name. He said, he or she, how do you run a very diverse team in the right way? Also mentioning that this may be a topic for another webinar, but if you do have tips about running a diverse teams, or you ran a diverse, I would say, teams of Twitter managers around the different NYPD stations. Or,
yeah. And I had 6 cops working for me who were all different backgrounds, and different ethnicities, and for us it was a lot of humor, good sense of humor, and just having fun and laughing at each other. That was a big part of it, and they would make fun of me.
You also had dogs in your team. Please tell us.
We didn't have a dog on our team, but NYPD has a lot of canines, a lot of dogs, and whenever I would see one in the elevator, I would beg them to come to our office, because and then everybody that I work with would be happy for like hours. So dogs, if you can have dogs, but a lot of humor and just kind of realizing the importance of the work that you do, and kind of commitment to the mission. And yeah, I think that for us was a big thing. We were we're still to this day, we talk, we're friends, we meet, and just try to have fun in what you do, and then the differences, you'll see that again, the differences really are like a lot less of a big deal than you think when everybody's doing good work and having fun.
Exactly. As you mentioned earlier, especially in this day and age, it's very important to have diverse team or diverse people you can consult with in order to really ensure that the message is more correct and right and authentic, I would even try to say. Yeah, Ellie, thank you so much. And for me, it's been incredible. You know, we're friends for years, but we don't always talk really deep
We don't
about.
talk in English for an hour. That's
That's true as well.
Yeah.
So it was very refreshing and interesting for me to get more into your world and expertise. You can, of course, learn more and reach out to Yael on her website, Yael Bar Tur, like her name.com. And of course, through Twitter, LinkedIn, and so on. Thank you, Lilach, also for.
Please follow me on Facebook. I have a page called Yael Bar Tur Consulting. And if you go to my website, I hope you will sign up for my newsletter. I promise I don't send a lot of things, but you know, I try to keep people updated with what's going on social media for, you know, anyone who's interested.
And if I may, in a very modest way, thank you for being the Israeli that, you know, managed the digital strategy for NYPD. I think for us as an Israelis, it's also a great honor to have someone like you doing this job. And again, thanks to you, everybody who stayed here all the way for choosing to spend this time with us. I appreciate you, and good luck, everybody. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Be safe.
Thanks, Gail. Thank you. Thanks, Ivan. Thanks, Mora, Shelly, Inon, Lilach. Bye-bye. Thanks.